His text landed like a slap, bright against the dim room. Evan was keeping Sophie tonight because it was convenient, because the roads were ugly, because his family had already claimed her Christmas. He tacked on a reminder about money, the kind that always showed up when my throat was already tight. I could feel the old trick working, the one that shrank me until I fit whatever space he decided to give me. I turned the phone face down on the couch and stared at my apartment in Wicker Park, like it was a photograph of someone else's life. Outside the window, snow fell in thick curtains, muting Chicago into a soft hush. Inside, the refrigerator hummed from the kitchen, and the radiator ticked as it fought the cold. I had made hot cocoa hours ago. Now it was cold enough to taste like resignation, a thin ring of chocolate drying on the mug. Anna, my tiny plastic tree, leaned a little because one leg was cracked, so I had wedged a folded receipt under it. The ornaments were mostly Sophie's choices. A glittery star she insisted was the most important. A paper snowflake she cut last year with safety scissors, proud of the jagged edges. A cheap bell that jingled if you brushed it, like it was trying to pretend it belonged. The apartment still held her, even when she wasn't here. A rainbow drawing was taped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. One striped sock had slipped out of the laundry basket and ended up under the armchair, like evidence of a small life that refused to stay contained. Her little boots sat by the door, lined up the way I lined them up when I needed to feel useful. Tonight, they looked like a question. Where is she supposed to come home to if I keep turning into a ghost? Shared custody means shared holidays, but Evan had always been good at making his half feel bigger. He knew how to sound reasonable while pressing on bruises. If I argued, I was unstable. If I went quiet, I was easy. So I had learned to keep my world small and predictable. Remote work. Groceries delivered. Friends answered with heart emojis and quick check-ins I could handle. I called it peace. Most nights it was. Tonight it felt like a lid. June Harper from 2 doors down had tried to pull me into the world anyway. She always did. Every December she offered a plate and a chair at her table, like loneliness was something you could cure with gravy and extra napkins. I had refused so many times that my no had probably started to sound like a personality, and I told myself I was protecting my heart. The truth was, I was protecting my pride. Earlier, when I took out the trash, I found a paper bag outside my door. A folded card was tucked under the handles, the handwriting neat and familiar. No guilt, no performance, just kindness. Cookies wrapped in wax paper, warm enough to fog the plastic when I lifted it. The smell hit me hard, butter and cinnamon, the kind of simple comfort that made my eyes sting. I carried the bag inside and set it on the counter like I didn't know what to do with something given freely. I tried to distract myself. A movie played, the kind where families laughed too loudly and everything ended neatly. I lasted 10 minutes. Then I scrolled my phone and felt my chest tighten at matching pajamas, kids asleep under twinkling lights, friends smiling in rooms full of people. I shut the screen off again and stared at Sophie's paper snowflake on the tree. On nights she was with me, I read the same book twice because she liked the second reading better. Then I kissed her forehead and hummed a silly tune until her breathing slowed. The idea that she was doing that routine without me made my hands ache. Near midnight, the building settled into deeper quiet. Somewhere below, a door shut. The elevator cables sighed. I pulled a throw blanket over my legs and told myself I could make it to morning, that I could survive one more holiday by keeping my heart at arm's length. I was mid-breath, trying to swallow the lump in my throat, when the silence broke. At 11:58 p.m., 3 sharp knocks hit my door. I froze, mug halfway to my mouth. The sound was too precise, too confident. I, like whoever stood in the hallway, expected to be answered. For a wild second, I wondered if loneliness had started inventing noise. Then the hallway went still again, and my pulse kept racing as if it knew better. I set the mug down carefully and crossed the hardwood barefoot. every step loud in my ears. My hand hovered near the lock. I didn't call out. I didn't touch the chain. I leaned into the peephole and looked. A man filled the circle of glass, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black coat dusted with snow. Dark hair, sharp lines, the kind of stillness that belonged to someone who never had to ask twice. He stood in my hallway like the building recognized him, and something in the calm way he waited tightened my skin with the feeling of restrained danger. I kept my hand on the deadbolt while I slid the chain off, and opening the door no wider than my palm. Cold hallway air rushed in, carrying snow and someone else's cologne, dark and expensive. The man did not lean forward or crowd me. He stood back, shoulders squared, like he already knew the distance that makes a woman feel trapped. My pulse hammered anyway. His gaze flicked once to my bare feet, then to my face, steady as a lock. I searched for a badge, for a package, for anything normal. Instead, I saw only patience and something dangerous. He spoke first, low and controlled, and the sound carried authority without volume. He said June Harper's name like it was a promise, and my stomach tightened. June was my neighbor, my would-be Christmas dinner, my unanswered knocks of kindness. The man introduced himself as Dante Moretti, and then he said my name, Maya Reynolds, as if it belonged in his mouth. That should have been the moment I slammed the door. Instead, I felt a sharp, unexpected fear for June. I asked myself why he was here, and why now. His eyes did not flinch when I hesitated. Dante told me June was safe, spending the holiday with family out in the suburbs, and that she had asked him to check on me. The information hit harder than any threat. I had refused June's invitations so many times that I forgot she could still care. I pictured her soft hands arranging cookies in a bag, trying to help a younger woman without embarrassing her. My throat tightened. Dante's expression shifted, not softer exactly, but less like stone. He asked to come inside because what he needed to say was sensitive. I stepped back, letting him in, by instinct. In my living room, with my crooked tree and second-hand couch, Dante looked like a shadow that had wandered into a child's drawing. He explained, in a calm way that made my skin prickle, that he ran businesses in the gray spaces of the city, and that enemies came with that territory. One enemy in particular, Victor Klein, had decided to make a point by hurting people who could not fight back. People like June, people like me. I felt my anger flare, hot and helpless. I did not choose his war, yet it had found my door at Christmas. He reached into his coat and my muscles tensed, but he pulled out a phone. On the screen sat a black sedan across from my building, exhaust ghosting in the cold. He said it had been there since 8 p.m., engine running, 3 men inside. My stomach rolled as I imagined them counting lights and doors. I'm deciding which woman looked easiest to break. Dante said his people were watching them too, but watching was not the same as stopping. I wanted to call the police. He reminded me, without drama, that Victor's influence ran through precincts like rot through wood. Fear is supposed to make you small. Mine made me calculate. If something happened to me, Sophie would be left with Evan's version of love, the one with strings attached. I stared at Dante and weighed the dangers. The sedan outside, the stranger inside, my own loneliness in between. I set my rules like stepping stones. I needed my phone. I needed to contact my brother, and June, and check on Sophie. I needed my own room and the right to leave. I needed proof, not just a story. Dante listened, then agreed with a decisive nod right there, silently. The absurd part was how prepared he was to prove himself. He talked about paperwork and witnesses, as if power could still be bound by ink. That respect disarmed me. I moved through my bedroom, hands shaking as I filled a duffel with clothes, toiletries, and my laptop. I grabbed Sophie's stuffed bunny from her pillow and tucked it inside like a heartbeat. From my nightstand, I took a family photo, my parents and me near the lake, proof that love once existed without fear. When I returned, Dante stood by the door, as if movement might scare me away. We took the elevator down in tense silence. Dante kept an angle beside me, never touching, but always close enough that I could breathe. Outside, the street was a snow globe under lamps. And there it was. The black sedan sat across from my building, idling like it had all the time in the world. My breath caught. Dante guided me toward an SUV at the curb, where a driver waited. As I climbed into the back seat, I felt eyes tracking us from behind tinted glass. The door shut with a thud, and my life vanished in snowfall tonight. Snow swallowed the street noise as the SUV rolled away from my curb. In the rear window, my building shrank into a gray block, the lobby light a single tired eye. The black sedan slid out behind us for half a block, then drifted to another lane like it was only curious. My stomach stayed tight anyway. I kept one hand inside my duffel, rubbing Sophie's stuffed bunny until the fabric warmed under my fingers. Chicago passed in blurred holiday fragments, wreaths in bar windows, buses hissing through slush, people laughing under shared umbrellas. Dante sat beside me, close enough that I felt his heat through our coats, but he never touched me. That restraint felt intentional, like he understood what fear does to a woman's sense of space. I watched the side mirrors, expecting the sedan to reappear, and hated how my mind kept turning every taillight into a threat. We crossed into streets where the snow looked freshly brushed and the cars were quieter, newer, sealed tight against winter. The entrance we finally reached was covered and bright, guarded by cameras that blinked like patient eyes. A man in a long coat stepped forward before the SUV fully stopped. He didn't smile, but his posture softened when he saw Dante. Doors opened without questions. I realized power could look like permission, not noise. Inside, warm air hit my face and melted the snow on my lashes. The lobby smelled like polished stone. Modern art hung where a normal building would post a fire escape map. Dante moved like he belonged, yet he kept half a step behind me, letting me lead. A private elevator waited with no buttons, only a panel that lit when he tapped a card. The doors sealed shut, and I fought the thought that I had stepped into a designed cage. The elevator opened straight into his home. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the living space, showing the lake as dark glass, and the city as a scattered circuit of lights. Snow drifted past the panes in slow spirals, turning Chicago into a quiet snow globe. The room was enormous, the kind of square footage I'd only seen in magazines. Yet the silence didn't feel empty. It felt held, like the air itself knew how to keep secrets. I expected a showroom. Instead, I saw life. Books stacked too deep, dog-eared and underlined. A throw blanket folded on the couch like it had been tugged into place by tired hands. A bowl of clementines on the counter beside a cutting board, a half lemon left out as if someone had paused mid-routine. Even the lighting was soft, lamps instead of harsh overhead glare. My chest loosened a fraction, betrayed by comfort. Dante offered tea the way a normal person would, like it wasn't strange to bring a frightened neighbor into your home at nearly 1 a.m. When the mug warmed my palms, my body finally caught up with the night. My hands trembled against the porcelain. I stared at the skyline until my eyes blurred, trying to convince myself that height meant safety. Then my reflection in the glass reminded me the danger hadn't vanished. It had simply followed me inside my skin. I kept running silent tests. Where was the exit? Where was my phone? How fast could I lock a door? Being protected was not the same as being owned, and I watched for any sign that kindness was a costume. Dante didn't crowd me or demand gratitude. In a few quiet sentences, He let something slip. He had spent Christmases alone for years, not from preference, but from the way his world turns closeness into leverage. He mentioned June Harper, and how her call about the mother who never opened her door had landed in him like an accusation. I heard the truth under his control. He wanted to keep me safe, yes, but he also wanted a reason to feel human again for a few days. The honesty was blunt, and it unsettled me more than a lie. Trust is expensive when you're a single mom. The price isn't only your heart, it's your child's stability. He showed me a hallway and a door that would be mine. Private bathroom, fresh towels, a lock that worked from the inside. He stepped back as if he understood that space can be safety too. When I was alone, I sat on the edge of the bed with Sophie's bunny in my lap and my parents' photo under my hand. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent. Somewhere below, Victor Klein's men still existed. In a few hours, morning would arrive with coffee, and the question I couldn't stop asking: what does safety cost when the threat is still out there? Around 10 a.m., pale winter light spilled across the glass and woke me like a hand on my shoulder. For a moment, I forgot where I was, then the quiet told me, not my radiator, not my neighbor's TV, but a hush that belonged to height. Coffee drifted through the hallway, warm and dark, and my body remembered last night all at once. I sat up in sheets that felt too smooth to be real, and listened to the soft hum of a home that was not mine. When I stepped out, the penthouse looked gentler in daylight, less like a fortress, and more like someone's attempt at peace. Dante stood at the stove in a dark t-shirt, sleeves pushed up, moving with the calm precision of a man who trusted heat more than people. A skillet hissed, the smell of sausage and eggs rising with steam, and something in my chest tightened because the scene was so ordinary. Across the counter sat Mark Vega with a newspaper and a phone, his eyes lifting every time my footsteps changed. He didn't smile, but he didn't watch me like a suspect either. He watched the room like a clock. I accepted a mug of coffee and let the heat settle my hands, noticing that I had slept later than I had in months. Relief tried to sneak in, but it was chased by the memory of the sedan and the men inside it. Mark's phone buzzed, and the air shifted, the way it does right before a storm breaks. He and Dante exchanged a look that held more information than words, and I felt my spine go straight. In the early hours, Victor Klein's men had tried to get into my building. They were turned away and intercepted before they reached any door that mattered, but the attempt alone made my stomach burn. I pictured my hallway, the thin walls, the little boots by my door, and fury rose so fast it surprised me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the insult of being chosen because I lived alone, because I was easy to scare. I thought of Sophie brushing her teeth, counting to 10 like I taught her, and the rage sharpened into something clean. If I disappeared, my daughter would grow up learning that the world can erase her mother with a phone call and a locked door. I would not give Victor that lesson. While Dante plated breakfast, I checked my phone and saw a message from my brother in Singapore, sent while I slept. I also had a missed call from June Harper, and guilt pressed down again, heavy as winter coats. I called her back and listened as her worry poured through the line like warm soup, steadying me without asking anything in return. She reminded me, in her gentle way, that Dante was the kind of man who paid old debts and protected the people most men ignored. Hearing that from her, from someone who had nothing to gain, made my shoulders drop for the first time all morning. After I hung up, Dante set a small gift bag beside my plate, as if it were no big deal. Inside was a children's picture book with a brave girl on the cover, a new set of crayons, and a tiny knit hat the color Sophie loves most. My eyes stung, not because of the price, but because he had seen the part of me that always carries a second heartbeat. A man like Dante could have bought me diamonds and still missed what mattered. Instead, he chose something my daughter could hold. I felt exposed by the tenderness, and I hated myself for needing it. We ate, and the food tasted like care, like someone had decided I deserved real warmth instead of survival snacks. I told myself I would stay a few days, long enough for Dante to end whatever message Victor was trying to send. But I also told myself I would keep my life attached to me, not float away into his world entirely. I needed my laptop, my deadlines, my video calls, and my right to check on Sophie and June and my brother whenever I wanted. Dante accepted those needs without pushing back, and that made him harder to categorize than any rumor. Later, he pulled on his coat with a quiet focus that told me he was leaving for business I wasn't meant to name. When the door closed behind him, the penthouse felt too big, too quiet, and suddenly, too intimate. I sat at the table with my coffee, my daughter's bunny, and the hat in my hands, realizing the threat outside was real, but the risk was how fast I was already trusting the warmth inside. By noon, the penthouse had started to feel less like a museum and more like a borrowed office. I claimed the long dining table, opened my laptop, and tried to pretend my life hadn't just been rerouted by a midnight knock. Spreadsheets filled the screen. Numbers behaved. People didn't. Every time my inbox chimed, my shoulders jumped like the sound might be a gunshot. Mark Vega moved through the background with quiet purpose. He didn't hover, but he was always present in the way a seatbelt is present. Coffee appeared near my elbow. A charger sat beside it. When I stood to stretch, he repositioned without making it obvious, keeping exits clear. It felt less like surveillance and more like shelter for me today. I joined video calls and kept my voice steady while my heart sprinted. I smiled at coworkers, talked deadlines, then muted myself and breathed through the tremble in my hands. Between meetings, I checked my phone for Sophie's name, even though I knew it wouldn't appear. The guilt stayed hot under my ribs. I was warm here, and my daughter was not. I survived for Sophie, not myself at all. Evening changed the energy. Dante came back smelling of cold air and expensive soap, his expression tired but controlled. He didn't ask me to entertain him. He just moved into the kitchen like it was the only place where the world made sense. I found myself drifting closer, not because I trusted the situation, but because the sound of a knife on a cutting board was the first normal rhythm I'd heard in days. We cooked together in a cautious orbit. I washed vegetables while he worked the stove. Our hands brushed once when we reached for the same towel, and my skin lit up in a way that made me mad at my own body. He didn't take advantage of the moment. He just gave me space, as if he understood that gentleness can feel like pressure when you're used to bracing for impact. Somehow, that restraint made the room feel charged anyway. After dinner, we landed on opposite ends of the couch with a movie playing, louder than necessary. I made one dry observation and caught the edge of his amusement. It was brief, but it loosened something in me. A blanket appeared on my lap. The sink was cleared before I noticed. Care that didn't demand anything back felt almost suspicious. On the second night, I caught myself running Sophie's bedtime in my head. Toothbrush, story, 2 songs, never 3. A note I would have slipped into her lunchbox if she were here. I realized I'd been carrying the whole house alone so long I didn't know what to do when someone carried a corner with me. It was safer to need nothing than to ask and be refused. But that safety was tasting like dust. The third night, sometime after midnight, sleep wouldn't come. The city lights outside the glass looked like they were holding their breath with me. I lay there listening for sirens that never arrived, and thinking about Victor Klein's sedan, about doors that can be opened from the outside. Dante had mentioned, almost casually, that his door stayed open in case I needed anything. No demand, no expectation, just an option. The choice sat in my chest like a dare. I padded down the hallway in socks, my pulse loud in my ears. His door was open, a slice of warm light spilling onto the floor. He was awake, propped up, reading like rest was a habit he didn't practice. He looked up, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not hunger, not ownership, just recognition. I didn't explain much. I didn't have to. I only let myself admit, silently, that I was tired of being brave in an empty room. He shifted to make space, and I climbed in like someone stepping into shelter during a storm. His arm came around me with careful strength, the kind that asks permission by moving slowly. I focused on his steady breathing, on the solid weight of his chest at my back, and felt my nervous system finally unclench. Being held was terrifying in a way being hunted wasn't. Being hunted, I knew how to survive. Being cared for asked me to risk hope. I fell asleep with my hand still curled around Sophie's bunny, Dante's heartbeat counting time beneath my palm. Somewhere far below, Chicago kept moving, and somewhere in it, men like Victor plotted. The peace felt fragile, like glass warmed by candlelight. I knew it couldn't last untouched, but for that one night, in that quiet pocket of warmth, I stopped disappearing. And I feared what would happen when the outside war remembered to look inside. Morning should have felt soft after the night I fell asleep against Dante's steady breathing. Instead, I woke to his phone vibrating on the nightstand like an alarm inside my bones. He read one message and the warmth drained from his face, replaced by the blank focus of command. The room seemed to tighten around him. I sat up, clutching Sophie's bunny, and watched him become someone built for emergencies. In that instant, I understood peace here was borrowed time. He told Mark Vega to get me inside the safe room, and his voice carried a kind of certainty that made my stomach flip. Something had happened at one of his warehouses, an attack meant to burn money and send a message. I caught fragments about smoke, alarms, and men rushing into the night. Dante pulled on boots and a coat in one smooth motion. I wanted to follow, but I was a mother first, and survival was my job. Mark guided me through a back hallway into an interior room with thick doors and no windows. The air smelled of metal and cleaning solution like a place designed to erase panic. A couch, a table and screens that could show the city without letting it see me. My laptop sat useless in my bag. I tried to work, then tried to read, then paced until my legs ached. Mark stayed calm, checking his phone, checking the door, watching me. On time stretched in ways I refreshed my phone and saw a vague headline about a warehouse fire on the south side. No names, no context, just smoke and sirens behind a paywall. I imagined Dante walking into that heat, and my throat tightened. To keep from spiraling, I pictured Sophie's face when she wakes from nightmares, the way she reaches before she opens her eyes. I promised myself silently that I would come home to her, whatever home meant now. Mark answered calls in short bursts, his expression never giving me enough to cling to. He would nod once, then look at me like he was deciding how much truth I could carry. I hated that I needed anyone's permission to know what was happening. I tried to sit, tried to pray, tried to breathe. My body wanted to run down the hall and break every rule. Then the elevator chime sounded and the room door opened without a knock. Dante stepped in with snow melting on his shoulders and a tear along his sleeve. His knuckles were scraped and damp with red that I couldn't place, and his jaw was set so hard it looked painful. Relief hit me so fast my knees weakened, followed by anger that he could make me feel this much in such a short time. He crossed to me, scanning my face, my hands posture as if safety was the report that mattered most. Before I could ask anything else, he said the penthouse was no longer secure. Victor's reach had threaded into the building through someone trusted, someone who saw a paycheck and chose it over loyalty. The idea made my skin crawl. This place had felt untouchable high above the streets, but suddenly it was just another address. Dante's plan shifted on the spot. We would leave Chicago and go to his estate in Lake Forest where walls and guards were solid. Then he gave me an exit I didn't expect. If I wanted out, he could make me disappear. A new name, a new city, enough money to breathe while I rebuilt. He described it with the same calm he used for security routes, as if vanishing someone was just another form of care. For a heartbeat, I considered it because fear whispers that running is smart. But I had run for years, and it only made my world smaller still. I looked at Sophie's bunny and felt my choice settle. I could not teach my daughter that danger is met by shrinking. I could not build a life where every hard moment ends with me disappearing. Staying with Dante was not romance. It was choosing support over isolation. I told him steadier than I felt that I would go to Lake Forest, follow the rules, and refuse to abandon myself again. Because Sophie needed a mother who stayed even afraid. Within minutes, Mark moved us through a service corridor to an underground garage I hadn't known existed. 3 SUVs, idled men posted at every corner. Dante kept himself between me and open space as we walked, not touching, only shielding. When the door closed, Chicago became a blur of lights and snow. My building and my old life vanished behind us. If the penthouse could be breached, safety had to be earned elsewhere. Ahead, Lake Forest waited, and I breathed. By late afternoon, the SUVs carried us north, away from the glow of downtown Chicago and into a quieter kind of snow. Streetlights thinned, the lake disappeared behind dark trees, and my phone kept vibrating with updates I wasn't allowed to read. Mark sat up front, another guard drove, and Dante stayed beside me, one hand resting on the seat back like a barrier he could lift at will. I watched the side mirror until my eyes burned, half expecting the black sedan to reappear, and half ashamed that fear had taught me to live that way. The estate announced itself in layers. A first gate set back from the road, then a second gate with cameras that followed the SUVs as if they were counting breaths. Men in winter jackets checked undercarriages, scanned plates, and nodded only after a voice crackled through their earpieces. Safety, I realized, wasn't one locked door. It was a long series of no's, and the rare yes that came after. Beyond the final checkpoint, a stone house rose from the white ground like it had been standing there before the city was even a rumor. Warm light glowed behind thick windows, and the roofline carried the weight of generations. Inside, the entryway smelled faintly of cedar and bread, and a woman with silver hair and steady eyes met us with a towel already folded over her arm. She moved like she ran the place without needing to say so, the way June Harper did in our building, except this house had staff and silent alarms. Somewhere deeper inside, pots clinked, footsteps hurried, and the whole place shifted to make room for danger. Dante led me down a hall lined with framed photographs. A boy in a too-big suit, an older man with hard eyes, a woman whose smile looked like relief. I didn't need anyone to explain who had loved him and who had trained him. My room was prepared as if someone had been expecting me all along. Fresh linens, a small nightlight, a basket with tea and crackers, and a child-sized step stool in the bathroom. That last detail hit me in the ribs. I had just set Sophie's bunny on the pillow when Mark's phone rang, and the calm in the hallway sharpened. A few minutes later, the front doors opened again, and a small figure stepped in wrapped in a puffy coat that was one size too big. Sophie's hat was crooked, her cheeks pink from cold, and her eyes went wide the second she saw me. The sound that came out of me wasn't a word. It was everything I'd held in since Evan's text. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into my arms, breathing in her shampoo, her wool, the familiar, warm, sweet smell of my child. She clung to me like she'd been practicing bravery, too. And my chest loosened so suddenly it almost hurt. Then anger flooded in, sharp and clean, because she shouldn't have been moved like luggage on Christmas week. June had made it happen. I learned in fragments, calling in favors, insisting on a safe pickup when Evan decided he didn't want the responsibility after all. Part of me wanted to scream at him across the miles, but Sophie's arms around my neck reminded me what mattered. Dante didn't rush in to claim the moment. He stayed a few steps back, lowering himself until he was at Sophie's eye level, his hands open and empty, his voice soft enough that it didn't steal the room. He offered her a small stuffed bear from a pocket of his coat like he'd planned for a frightened child, not just a frightened woman. Watching him, I understood a new kind of power, the kind that bends down instead of looming. Sophie leaned into my side, still cautious, and I felt something in me start to believe this protection wasn't a performance. After dark, once Sophie was fed and bathed and finally calm, Mark pulled Dante aside near the study. I didn't hear words, but I saw the shift in Dante's shoulders, the way his gaze went distant and hard. A meeting with Victor Klein was coming, something meant to end this or ignite it. The estate could hold enemies outside its gates, but it couldn't hold the fear that crawled into a mother's thoughts. Later, I tucked Sophie into a bed that smelled like clean cotton and safety, read her favorite story from memory, and smoothed her hair until her breathing turned slow. She asked with her eyes if tomorrow would be normal, and I answered with my hands, promising I would be there when she woke. But as I closed the door and faced the hallway, I knew tomorrow could demand a kind of bravery. Sometime after 2 a.m., the estate was quiet enough that I could hear the old house breathe. Heat clicked through hidden vents, and wind brushed the windows like fingers testing glass. I padded down the hallway in my socks, carrying a cup of lukewarm tea, because sleep kept slipping away the moment I stopped moving. Pictures lined the walls in heavy frames, men in dark suits, women in soft light, children posed with forced smiles. The farther I walked, the more I understood Dante's power wasn't a choice he picked up for fun. It was a weight passed hand to hand, the way some families pass down a farm or a name. Near the library door, a photo of his mother stopped me. Her eyes looked kind and tired at the same time, as if she'd known exactly what the world would demand from her son. I thought about Sophie asleep upstairs with her bunny tucked under her chin, and the fragile miracle that she was here at all. Every time she exhaled, I felt my own fear loosen for half a second. Dante was awake in the study, jacket off, sleeves rolled, staring at a map spread across the desk with a pen in his hand. The lamplight cut sharp lines across his face, making him look older than he had in the kitchen. Mark stood nearby with a tablet, quiet as a shadow. They both glanced up when I appeared, and I sensed they had been measuring time in minutes, not hours. The meeting with Victor Klein was set for late morning, neutral ground, public enough to discourage chaos and private enough to hide it. I didn't need details to know what that meant. Dante's whole body carried the tension of a man about to walk into a room where smiling could be a weapon. He looked at me for a long beat, then stood and came closer, stopping just short of touching, like he was asking permission without asking. I could tell he wanted to say something that didn't fit inside strategy. His gaze flicked toward the hallway where Sophie slept, then back to me, and his throat worked like the words were heavy. When he finally let them out, there was no performance in it. He confessed he loved me, plain and urgent, as if the only honest moment he could guarantee was the one right now. My first instinct was to retreat, to protect myself with logic and timing and all the reasons this should be impossible. I had known him for days, not years. I had a child to raise, bills to pay, a life built from careful routines. Love, in my world, had always come with an invoice. But the way he said it made me believe he wasn't buying me. He was risking himself. I told him, in the only language I trusted, that I was terrified. Terrified of Victor, terrified of headlines, terrified of Sophie growing up watching men decide her mother's fate. Terrified that my heart was waking up after years of starvation. Still, I admitted I felt something real with him, something steady underneath the danger. If it didn't hold up under pressure, I would walk away. If it did, I would stop running. He didn't answer with promises that sounded like movies. He answered by confirming my boundaries, by making sure Sophie's room had an extra lock, by arranging that June Harper would be checked on too. He let me keep my phone, my work, my name. That restraint wrapped around me like a coat. It also made me furious at Victor for forcing love to feel like a hostage situation. Before dawn, the house shifted into motion. Vehicles were prepped, routes reviewed, men rotated at doors. Dante showered and dressed in a dark suit that made him look like he belonged in court, and wore at the same time. I helped straighten his tie with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking, hating that tenderness could be this sharp. When he stepped back, he left me with one last look that felt like a goodbye he refused to name. He walked out with Mark and the others, the cold air swallowing them as the front doors closed. I stood in the entryway until the sound of engines faded, then I forced myself upstairs to Sophie's room. She slept with her new bear tucked under one arm, and peaceful in a way adults never are. I sat beside her and listened to the house, wondering if the fortress could hold, and if love could survive the next few hours. Outside, snow kept falling, soft as denial. Inside, every hallway light seemed brighter. I checked my phone too often, braced for bad news, knowing the silence before impact is the cruelest one. After Dante left, the house felt too big for the sound of my breathing. I kept Sophie close, pretending the quiet was normal, like we were simply visiting a fancy place for the holidays. She colored at the kitchen table while I watched the driveway through frosted glass, counting headlights and pretending I knew what I was looking for. Minutes stretched into hours. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened, and every time it stayed silent, my mind invented reasons. A fortress can keep strangers out, I thought, but can it keep fear from moving in with us tonight? Around mid-afternoon, Mark's radio crackled and everyone's posture changed. He didn't raise his voice, but the staff moved faster, doors closing, curtains drawn, lights dimmed in rooms that faced the road. The message was simple in its cruelty. Victor Klein had refused the offer, and he had sent men to trail Dante's convoy back here. I was guided downstairs with Sophie bundled against my side. The safe room door was thick enough to feel like a bank vault, and when it shut, the silence turned heavy. Monitors glowed on the far wall, and I learned waiting can hurt too. Inside, the basement room looked like something built for storms and secrets. An independent air unit whispered above us, and a row of screens showed the gates, the driveway, and the perimeter trees, the guardhouse. 2 house staff sat on a bench with pale faces, and the silver-haired woman from upstairs murmured prayers under her breath. Sophie climbed into my lap without asking, her crayon box clutched like armor. I hated hiding, but I hated the thought of her seeing violence more. So I became calm on purpose, the way mothers do. I told her stories, counting her breaths slowly. The first feed showed the road beyond the outer gate, empty except for falling snow. The second showed the inner drive, where guards stood behind stone planters as if they were part of the landscaping. I kept Sophie busy, asking her to draw our apartment, then the tree, then a pretend vacation where the sky was always blue. When her hand shook, I wrapped mine over hers. In my head, I repeated the same promise. Stay alive, stay steady, I bring her through this. My own fear came in waves, but I made my face a shoreline for her to trust. Headlights appeared on screen, first 3 familiar SUVs, then 2 more cars that didn't match the convoy. The outer gate began to close, metal sliding with a slow finality that made my teeth ache. On another monitor, Dante's vehicles surged inside, tires carving dark tracks through the snow. The trailing cars accelerated. One slammed through before the gate fully sealed, and another followed so close it looked attached. Guards moved like choreography, taking cover, signaling, aiming without panic. Sophie pressed her face to my sweater, and I kept my voice soft, pretending this was only thunder outside our basement walls. The monitors flashed with movement and gray smoke, not from fire but from the world being torn open outside. Sound reached us as muffled pops and distant shouts, swallowed by stone. Radio chatter flickered through a speaker, too fast to parse. But I saw enough. Men running, shadows dropping, bodies behind vehicles, then retreat. About 15 minutes that felt like an hour passed in a tight loop of images. My stomach turned each time Dante's silhouette appeared, directing others with sharp gestures. Then, suddenly, the driveway cleared. The chaos thinned into stillness. I realized I'd been holding my breath again. A call came through, and Mark's expression finally loosened. The door opened, and we were escorted up into air that tasted like metal and winter. Outside, the grounds looked bruised, snow churned into mud. A few vehicles smoking softly, scattered debris glittering under floodlights. Dante stood near the gate with a line of red along his side where the fabric had torn, more scrape than wound. When he saw me, the hardness in his face broke. I reached him, shaking, and he pulled me close like I was proof he'd made it back. For a moment, anger dissolved into relief. Mark reported that Victor himself hadn't been among the attackers, which meant the war still had a brain behind it. Dante's jaw tightened, and his decision was immediate. This would end tonight. The certainty scared me almost as much as the siege. I asked for a few hours back at my apartment, not to be stubborn, but to remember my life, to call my brother, to touch my walls before more decisions were made. Dante agreed only with protection. As SUVs prepared, snow kept falling, and I wondered if my need for normal was an opening Victor was counting on. Two SUVs brought me back to Wicker Park, and 4 men in dark coats followed me into the lobby like quiet furniture that could move. My apartment door opened on the same tiny tree, the same crooked ornament, the same cocoa mug still ringed with dried chocolate on the table. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt shrunken. The ceiling seemed lower. The hallway seemed thinner. The guards tried to stand out of sight, but their boots and earpieces made my home feel borrowed, as if normal life had been taped over danger. I swallowed, telling myself this was a pause. I walked room to room, touching familiar corners as if they could remind me who I was before men with guns started making plans around my name. Sophie's drawing was still on the fridge, and one striped sock still hid under the chair. But the apartment no longer felt like protection. It felt like the place I built when grief taught me to expect abandonment. I came back for a few hours to remember my own voice, to call my brother, to talk about weather and groceries, to breathe without strategy. I needed something ordinary to anchor my shaking body. In the bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone. My brother answered from Singapore, sounding sleepy and far away, and I let his everyday details wash over me. He talked about work deadlines, a new coffee place, his girlfriend's holiday cooking, and I pictured him in a humid apartment while snow covered my window. I laughed once, surprised it still existed in me. When we hung up, I made tea, exhaled slowly, and almost believed I was safe again. The guards stayed quiet in the living room, on like statues with heartbeats. The thump came from the living room, a heavy sound followed by silence that felt pressed flat. I waited for one of the men to call out, to signal it was nothing, but the hallway stayed mute. My skin went cold. I set my mug down and listened again. No footsteps, no radio crackle, just the refrigerator hum and my pulse. I held my phone like a lifeline and moved toward the doorway, careful with each breath, already cataloging exits the way fear had trained me. The living room lights were off, and that fact made my stomach drop hard. Shapes shifted near the couch, too many silhouettes to belong to my guards. I backed up, turned, and ran for my bedroom, locking the door with shaking hands. My fingers fumbled for Dante's secure number, but before I could finish the call, the frame jolted. The door splintered inward under a hard shove. Someone grabbed me from behind, clamping a hand over my mouth, and the room spun. Plastic cinched around my wrists. I fought, but a cold voice near my ear made my body freeze. In the hallway, I saw guards down, and I swallowed a scream for Sophie. They dragged me through the back stairwell, keeping my feet barely on the steps. Cold air slapped my face when a door opened, and the smell of snow and trash hit together. An alley waited, slick with ice, and a van idled with its side door yawning. I was shoved inside and landed on metal. Hands secured my ankles. The door slid shut with a final thud, cutting off light and sound. The engine revved, and the van rolled forward, taking my breath with it. I twisted against the restraints, listening for sirens, footsteps, any sign Dante was coming soon. Something rough was pulled over my head, and darkness turned thick and intimate. The fabric smelled like smoke and old detergent. The van's vibration traveled through my bones as we hit potholes, then smoothed into a steadier glide. Minutes became elastic. I counted turns by the sway of my body, trying to guess direction. A faint salt bite crept into the air, mixed with diesel, and I heard distant metal clinks like boats moving against docks. Panic tried to climb my throat. I pushed it down, repeating one rule: stay alive, stay smart. Sophie's face stayed bright in my mind. In that blackness, I forced my thoughts into order. Dante would notice when his men stopped reporting. Mark would trace routes, cameras, license plates, anything. I clung to that logic like rope. Whoever took me wanted leverage, not my story, and I used that fact to keep breathing. I pictured Sophie waking and asking for me, and the fear became fuel. Victor didn't have to storm the estate walls to win a moment. He only had to let me return to the life I used to hide in, then reach through it and grab. I promised myself I would last. The van door slid open and winter air poured in, sharp with diesel and lake water. Hands hauled me down onto cracked concrete, my knees wobbling under the hood. When the cloth was ripped away, fluorescent light stabbed my eyes. I was in a warehouse near the docks, all corrugated metal and echo, the floor damp from melting snow. A generator throbbed somewhere, and chains clinked like restless teeth. I smelled salt, oil, and cold fear. Men guided me forward, not rushing, certain I had nowhere to go. Beyond them, a single door faced me, all lit like a stage entrance. They sat me in a metal chair bolted to the floor and cinched plastic ties around my wrists and ankles. The chair faced the main door, making me an exhibit. In the center of the room, Victor Klein waited at a folding table, neat suit, silver hair, calm as a man in church. He watched me the way a butcher watches a cut, evaluating. His smile carried no warmth, only certainty. I realized he had been studying me for days, maybe longer, learning which fears to press. To him, my love was just leverage, and leverage was currency for him. Victor made a call with slow fingers, like he enjoyed the ritual. He spoke in measured tones I could not ignore, then turned the phone so his men could hear the instructions. The message was simple. Dante would arrive alone within 1 hour, or my body would become proof of failure. My stomach lurched, but anger held me upright. Sophie's face flashed behind my eyes, her small hand in mine crossing a street. I could not die in this warehouse. I forced my breathing steady and began counting. 6 men, 2 doors, windows out of reach, nowhere safe to run. Time crawled. Victor sat back, cleaning his watchband as if he had all night, while his men smoked near a loading bay and spoke in a language I didn't know. Every few minutes one of them glanced at me, checking that fear was still working. I tested the ties until my wrists burned, then stopped before panic made me stupid. I listened for anything that sounded like rescue. Sirens, footsteps, the crash of a door. Instead, I heard an engine outside, slowing, then idling. The warehouse door groaned, and the room held its breath with me. Metal coated my tongue. Dante stepped into the doorway with his hands visible and his shoulders loose, like he had come to surrender. No weapon showed, no escort followed. His gaze found me instantly, dark and furious under a careful mask, and I knew this was strategy, not collapse. Victor's satisfaction was almost audible, as if he believed love had finally made Dante careless. I wanted to warn him, but I stayed still because movement would get me hurt. Dante took one slow step forward, offering everything if Victor would release me. I heard the plan in the restraint. My heart begged him back. The first window shattered, then another, then several at once. A chorus of breaking glass. Metal cylinders bounced across the concrete and spilled thick gray smoke that stung my eyes and throat. Shapes moved inside the haze, feet pounding, on commands swallowed into muffled noise. Victor's men shouted and shifted positions, but the smoke made them clumsy. Dante moved fast through the chaos, appearing at my side like a shadow that chose me. A blade flashed and the ties snapped loose. He pulled me behind stacked crates and pressed my head to his shoulder until my breathing slowed. I stayed still. Gunfire sounded like distant construction, bursts swallowed by smoke. Silhouettes rushed past our cover, disciplined and fast, and I recognized Mark's outline as he signaled with one hand and aimed with the other. The fight ended as abruptly as it began. When the haze thinned, men lay groaning or silent, weapons kicked away, and the warehouse felt enormous again. Mark stood over Victor, who had been forced to his knees, his face finally stripped of amusement. Dante kept an arm around my shoulders, checking me for injuries with quick hands. Relief hit me so hard I laughed, then cried quietly. Dante moved me into the open space and waited, making it clear the choice was mine. Victor knelt under guard, arrogance still flickering behind his eyes. Anger surged through me. He had used me to reach Dante and turned Sophie's safety into leverage. Part of me wanted a clean ending. Another part heard my daughter's tiny voice asking what is right. If I chose revenge, I would teach her that power equals cruelty. If I chose mercy, I risked him returning. My hands shook as I realized my answer would shape what Dante became, and what Sophie learned from us. Victor knelt in the thinning smoke, wrists bound, pride still flickering in his eyes. Mark's men held him steady, and Dante stood beside me, silent, or waiting. The warehouse felt colder now that the noise had stopped. My hands shook, not from fear alone, but from the weight of being asked to choose. I wanted revenge. I wanted the kind of ending that would erase the last hour from my daughter's future. Then Sophie's face surfaced in my mind, sleepy and trusting, and I realized the choice was also hers. If I crossed that line tonight, she would inherit it forever. I looked at Victor and saw what power had done to him. A man who could not imagine any life without taking. I did not forgive him, and I did not pretend he was safe. But I also refused to make Dante kill for me. I told them to strip Victor of his reach, not his pulse, and to hand him to the people who could lock him away and expose every crime he'd hidden. Warrants, federal deals, rival pressure, whatever it took, or as long as Sophie never had to hear that her mother chose blood to protect what mattered. Dante studied me like he was measuring the future against the past. Then he nodded once, sharp with acceptance, and gave the order. Victor was hauled to his feet and moved out, still trying to look untouchable, while the cold night swallowed his footsteps. I stepped outside and the air hit my lungs like ice water. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, unaware of the private war that had just shifted. Dante wrapped my coat tighter without claiming me, just anchoring me, and I leaned into him long enough to stop shaking. For the first time, I believed mercy could outlast fear. Back at the estate, lights were low and voices stayed hushed, as if everyone feared waking the danger again. Sophie ran to me in her pajamas, hair wild, and I dropped to hug her until my knees hurt. She asked with her eyes what had happened, and I answered by breathing steady and holding her closer. June Harper called before dawn, her relief pouring through the phone like warmth, and I promised her I was safe. When I hung up, I realized she had helped stitch this strange family together. Outside, shifts doubled, and the gates stayed shut until morning. Victor's removal didn't end crime in Chicago, but it ended his campaign against us. Within hours, his people scattered like birds when the tree is cut down. Some tried to bargain, some disappeared, and some crawled toward Dante asking for protection. Mark and the others hunted the leak inside the penthouse building and shut it down, quietly, without spectacle. No victory parade, no fireworks, just a tightening of the circle. And I watched Dante choose patience over rage, and I understood that restraint was not weakness. It was the only way forward. Even Sophie slept as if the air had changed. In the weeks that followed, Dante didn't pretend he could scrub his world clean overnight. He met with lawyers, accountants, and people who talked in contracts instead of threats. He pushed money into logistics and real estate, cut off the most dangerous routes, and delegated the rest to hands he trusted. It looked boring from the outside, which made it revolutionary in his world. Some nights he came home exhausted, not from violence, but from choosing the slower path. I learned love can be quiet work, repeated daily, not one grand rescue. And he let me keep my life intact. I emailed my boss about a family emergency, then reopened my spreadsheets like nothing had happened. During calls, I kept my camera on, forcing myself to exist in my old world again. At night, when Sophie slept, I started therapy sessions by video, speaking aloud the truth I used to swallow. Grief made me build walls, and fear made me call them safety. I practiced small boundaries with Evan, refused last-minute changes, and stopped apologizing for needing stability. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was choosing calm one decision at a time. Dante respected every step, never rushing, never demanding gratitude. 3 months later, I stood in a Tuscan vineyard at golden hour, watching Sophie chase a kite between rows of sleeping vines. The air smelled like earth and rosemary, and the sky held that soft peach color Chicago never manages in winter. June Harper sat on a stone bench nearby, laughing as if she had always belonged in our story. Dante came up behind me and rested his hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. No sirens, no radios, just the quiet sound of family breathing together. We were here because we chose life, and someone once knocked at midnight. Travel didn't erase what happened. It just gave us room to see ourselves without adrenaline. Dante showed Sophie how to roll pasta dough, patient as if he'd been waiting for a child's laughter his whole life. I worked remotely in the mornings, then walked villages in the afternoons, letting my body learn calm again. Dante and I kept talking, not in declarations, but in check-ins. What scares you? What do you need? What boundary matters today? When nights came, his arm around my waist felt like shelter, not a trap. I flinched when love arrived, then started meeting it. Looking back, I can name the lesson without sounding like a sermon. Safety without connection kept me alive, but it also kept me small. Connection without boundaries would have swallowed me whole. The difference was choice. I chose to answer June's kindness. I chose to let Dante protect me without owning me. I chose to protect my daughter by staying present instead of hiding. None of it was perfect. Some nights I still woke sweating, but now I had tools, people, and a future worth waking for. If you're listening, ask what you're calling safety and what it costs you. I used to think the bravest thing was surviving alone. Now I know bravery is letting someone witness you and still choosing to stay. I won't pretend my story is a blueprint, because every heart carries different scars. But if you've ever spent a holiday staring at a silent phone, I want you to know you're not weak for wanting more. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if you want the next chapter, like and share this story. I'll be here reading every word, grateful you walked with us all the way.